Hey guys, this is Mikro. This is going to be a video on basically every single major change that's going to be happening to the PvP scene. I'm going to be going through a lot of patch notes here. I'm going to be trying to skim through them as quickly as I can without like missing anything major. So let's just get right into it, and at the end I'm going to have like a summary thing with like the big takeaways of like what the big uh things that will be good next patch are and like why, but it all stems from these changes. So new fire, well, like cart rune, whatever. It's kind of cool. It doesn't really do good damage. The main benefit of it is weaken. Weaken is good because fortify is terrible. This is fortify on the dash line, like on the next patch versus what it is on live. Main thing is it's linear versus quadratic, so it's going to be a lot less, and the slope is significantly less as well. Basically, fortify is not going to be usable. It does have a cap of 200, which is cool, but even if you get to that 200% fortify, it's going to be less than 50% fortify on a live patch. That's how bad fortify is on the next patch. And on a small scale, when you look at these like closer, it's in heavy it's worth about a third, and medium it's worth about a fourth of what it used to be, and then light it's worth about a fifth to a sixth. So not usable, I'd say, as a in general. Not a debuff. I've tested that again, but it's just not great at all. So, and then the main thing we're looking at next patch is there's things that provide a different kind of fortify that's basically like old fortify. That's things like your gems specifically and SNS defensive formation. Armor conditioning also works for that, but armor conditioning has other problems because you have to be hit by something and then the next hit will be reduced. So inherently it's not great, and it doesn't proc off burn ticks from testing, so doesn't seem like worth it for fire, as nice as that seemed. It is noteworthy that you can do that and shirking or elemental aversion. It's just like kind of awkward for most setups. Like a healer, if they did that, they'd have to cut refreshing, so it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Uh, Base damage is the next best thing. This is like your elemental aversion, but the problem with the base damage stuff is it's not actually 3.9%. It's a little bit less than that. It's like I think like lower three, upper two, like effective. But it's still better than shirking for it by a long shot, and it's going to be the thing that's going to be primarily run. Other thing that's big in here, so critical hits. So that's like why weakened is like good at a high level. Critical hits, this does not affect that much. It basically just means the weapons that weren't critting before are going to crit a bit more. If you had the crit damage stuff is if you have weaken on you, you'll be hitting harder. If you have empower on you, you'll be hitting for less. Not a huge impact. Basically, just means glass cannon nuker builds will not actually just one shot you next patch, but will be still good at it. So like fire staff that can get to a 1.65 base crit damage modifier will not be OTKing you. Maybe, but it still will hurt really hard. But yeah, that's basically what this changes. Uh, the CC thing, this basically just means you don't have to run as much freedom. Light does not get this. Heavy does not really have to worry about that much about crowd control anyway. But this is another way to mitigate that. Moving to 300 con, the strength perk, this basically opens up a lot of builds, like builds that can go now 150 dex, 300 con, like spear, that makes it really interesting. You have other aspects like great sword that don't really need the grit per se, that get opened up because they'll inherently do more damage, but great sword got other nerfs throughout this, so it's like kind of got nerfed and buffed at the same time, so it's a little bit harder to tell where it will land. They fixed some things with the perks. These are not as impactful. This is more PvE stuff. Uh, Crowd control stuff, the big spiel about this. Stuff that does damage will only do damage now. Stuff that does CC will not do damage or not do as much damage. So, and then on top of that, with the other changes to reducing CC, they're basically trying to limit the amount of CC that's in the game. Sort of like the path that Overwatch took with Overwatch 2, I guess. But seems a little bit less effective. They've tried to do it with some weapons, and then they realize it's like, hey, that doesn't really work in our game. So, like that happened with Rapier recently. They're just like, wait, if we make it so that Rapier doesn't stagger people, then it's just like awful. On top of all the other changes that's happened. So, yeah, Warhammer, not great. Good CC, I guess. It still is good CC. It's the best in the game, but it's just not as insane because the damage is a lot less. A wrecking ball. The damage will still go up though to a degree because of the fortify changes. That's the other thing I think to kind of keep in mind with all these. You can't really ward to melee anymore if you think about it, because people are going to be running elemental aversion most likely. So melee will just hit really, really hard. But that being said, if people run elemental aversion, then they don't have to slot as many opals, and they can run more melee stuff. But then there's a consequence of that. It's like, okay, but now you're not warded against melee attack range things. So that's basically ice spike and voidblade. So those two abilities will hit hard in that circumstance. There's a lot of like weird stuff that happens with the what you're warding to, and that's all important because what you ward to counts towards this 50% that behaves like this exponential old patch of Fortify. So that's where it gets kind of interesting. But anyways, Wrecking Ball not bad. Sorry, Warhammer is not going to be that bad. I don't think it will be as good because people will be a little bit more spread out. But that's just kind of personal take. SNS seems like it will be really good, mostly because of this weekend increase. Everything else doesn't really matter as much. I don't know why they nerfed reverse stab. That was never used in the first place. So there's a lot of that stuff across the board. I don't think they exactly know what they're doing, but we kind of know that at this point. Spear, removing the stagger and perforate's a big change, but they gave it a weekend, and that's like the best thing it could have gotten. So it seems like it's still going to be in a pretty good spot. The 300 con change to Spear is the thing that makes it really, really interesting, along with the 150 decks. Great Sword doesn't do as much damage as the TLDR of all this. Uh, they reverted this, so don't really have to worry about that. For Rapier, it will stagger now, and Great Axe does damage. It doesn't really do that significant damage. All of the gravel will be affected by elemental aversion, so that's not really a thing that you could try to play for doing damage anymore. So all the bruises that went all in that like void damage spec that's been popular this last patch is just kind of getting gutted. Hatchet won't do damage in CC. Bow, basically, you're not going to be playing for rapid shot ever again. Unless it's like to hit people on point, I guess, but there's better abilities in my opinion. Musket, not really playable because of the sway. Uh, Someone will figure out a way to play it though, but from now it does not seem playable, and it seems like they're trying to revert it to a degree. But if they revert it, then someone could just take over with that spec, so it will be kind of interesting. Ice Gauntlet, this is just a lie. It doesn't stagger as much, but it does still knock you out of ability animations from what I've seen from testing. And this doesn't matter at all, the scream damage, because that's not why it was good in the first place. These are just kind of quality of life slash like little tricks that you could have done before that no longer will be there. Bow damage nerfed, but because people are going to be warding more in elemental, and because shirking for it won't be around, will actually end up doing more damage in my opinion. But that's just a little bit on the aside. I think range damage in general is going to be really, really good next patch. Fire Staff, I don't want to go through every single change here, but just know that Fire Staff is the best damage weapon in the game next patch by a long shot. Most of its abilities are pretty good. I still think Incinerate feels pretty weak, but it's definitely not bad on a lot of specs. That being said, I think it will be primarily played in light with Blunderbuss or with Ice Gauntlet. Passives on here, and I don't want to talk about all these because it's just too much for one weapon to go into. Great Axe, Gravel being a range attack basically means elemental verse is going to prevent that from doing damage. I already talked about that a little bit. None of this stuff really is super important. Great Sword, they changed the honing, so it's not very significant anymore. Big nerf there. Relentless Rush getting reduced is also a big nerf. They also did a thing on top of this where they realized is like, hey, if people hit you with this at the last second, which is what everyone was trying to use it for in the first place, and for a detonate combo, that it was preventing people from dodging, so they changed that, which basically makes it so that it's not usable for with the detonate combo anymore. um, so that's kind of funny, but yeah, Great Sword does not seem like it's in a fantastic spot, but the main thing that benefits it is that it does not have to go that extra 300 con to do damage. Hatchet got a weird buff slash nerf with the Death Defy. This is like a off your max HP, so if you're an SNS at 20,000 health, you'll get healed for 10,000. If you're in a Sacred, you'll be healed for more than that. If you have Divine, you'll get healed for more than that, etc. But it's also affected by disease, which is a noteworthy thing, so it kind of works both ways. I think in some ways this is a buff, in some ways it's a nerf. Mostly, I think it's a buff, which is unintended because they reduced the cooldown on it and it's still pretty good. But there are some people that will play light and just like have no con, and for those people it is a nerf, which is like the primary way that hatchet was getting played before, so I think it's gonna be a little bit different now. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter as much. Well, besides the Berserk one's actually a really big deal because you can't just consistently heal off of that anymore. You kind of have the all in with the ability. It doesn't make it like useless, but it's mostly a ability to get out of staggers and then switch off at this point. It's not for the heal anymore. Ice Gauntlet's still the best secondary in the game by a long shot. They didn't do anything to it for some reason that deserves. It's worthy of so many nerfs. Uh, they actually buffed it to a degree. They buffed Wind Chill. Wind Chill is like not ever going to be useful because the other abilities in Ice Gauntlets are too good. Uh, Life Staff. The noteworthy thing about Life Staff is half the things on upgrade don't really, or half the things on here don't really work that well. Or like everything that was given you Fortify before is basically not doing anything. So Life Staff is just overall a lot weaker. I think it's more of a single target spec next pack than a patch than an AOE one. But you're probably gonna see every single healer with like Beacon Sacred because it's sacred and you just have to run it, and then some sort of single target heal. Maybe drop some beacons for double single target or clap if people are spread out enough, but that's going to be the big thing. I imagine a lot of healers will be getting one shot even faster than they were in the current patch to certain things, but at the same time, the main counter to people's specs, like you can't ward against everything next patch, so it will be really interesting to see how people choose to ward. Because if you ward to elemental and then you slot a bunch of thrusts, you just get one shot by melee, right? So, or you get maybe one shot by voidblade. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think you get one shot by voidblade though. Voidblade doesn't really hurt even if you don't ward against it. It only hits for like 1.5k maybe to 2k in light, but if you're playing in light, you're just gonna get one shot by other things. Because Fortify doesn't work anymore, so it's hard to gap close in light. Musket, not playable is the TLDR of all this. Not much more to that. SNS, none of this really matters. Void Gauntlet, the, it has extra weekends now with Tether, which is kind of interesting, but the changes to Voidblade where they just made 300 con give Voidblade grit basically means that you don't even think about that anymore. Voidblade is, I think as a default, is probably the best ability on Void Gauntlet when this hits live, but it's not played. I don't think it's going to be played everywhere, but it's just really, really good because it's the one thing that can cleave that has refreshing. They nerfed refreshing where it only could proc off of one person. They did not change that for Void Gauntlet, and Void Gauntlet also has the old effective run. Or if you look back at this image, see how it's like quadratic down here, so it's like really, really effective compared to like the linear stuff. Yeah, that's the Void Gauntlet. So Void Gauntlet's just like in an insane spot, and I don't think that it's gonna fall off for a little bit until it gets hot fixed. Which I imagine it might be because it just outperforms everything else in that kind of util slot extremely well, but at the same time, it's kind of always outperformed everyone in that slot, and so I don't think this is anything new. The new thing is that you might replace bruisers with void gauntlets, which is like kind of weird, but I think that makes sense because void blade is better than bruiser to an extent at like 300 con. I don't think it's always better, but I think it's conditionally better. On point, it might be better, but we'll see. Oblivion got really, really big nerf. This doesn't seem like it's a big nerf. The change to this is basically if you're dodging, you're not going to get that passive stand from Obliv, so you can't just kind of go infinite in them. It also means that if you're playing SNS, you actually have to put down your shield every now and then. None of this other stuff really matters. There's more auto stuff that got buffed with Void Gauntlet, but if you're trying to auto with Void Gauntlet, you're just using the wrong weapon. The autos on Void Gauntlet feel really clumsy, and they're really hard to hit, and they're kind of slow. They did get buffed, so it's a little bit faster, and it made it a little bit easier to hit. But it still, I don't think it's gonna be super good from basically all of these. The harvest, the efficient, or what do you call it? The void gauntlet thing where you would harvest yourself and give yourself CDR, that got turned into cleanse. So I think it's a big nerf. There's some people who think it's bad. Yeah, so it's refreshing harvest, a cleansing harvest. But none of these other changes I think will be super impactful. But that's the big one. Having like a slight buff on your light and heavies is like nice, but not having infinite CDR and actually having to have CDR in your void gauntlet's a big thing. And that's basically all for the big ones there. They did some updates on here to other like this is like perk oriented. So The accuracy thing that was intended for musket. I don't think it's gonna. I think they're gonna change that, but because it seems way too bad. Uh, and it's not gonna be used in any other game modes. But all of these don't really matter a ton. I think accuracy is like kind of interesting, but not super. It'd be kind of funny if you could like one shot people with BBs from further away with the accuracy thing, but I don't think that's gonna happen really. The trenchant recovery, I can't believe they got scared and did that already off the 300 strength thing. They're worried about great swords just going crazy with their recovery or something. The war changes, so this is defense meta. Target dummies can't be attacked during wars. What this basically means is that defenders will not have all the time when you crash in, so it's really big. Defenders selecting spawns in fort. The weird part about this from the one war I did, and I think there's only been one war in the PTR, was you could actually spawn on the flag as a defender, which is very strange. It also gets healers killed really quickly if you just like spam that respawn and they end up spawning on the center flag. It's just kind of a you actually spawn on the center like of the center flag and you will just get blown up. It's really funny. But yeah, don't think that's great. The attacker siege thing is actually really cool. The siege actually feels like it does a lot of damage. Like cannons are hitting for 8k, so that would be really interesting. Seems like these are overall like really good changes to wars. Outpost rest, none of this really matters a ton, to be honest. But yeah, still waiting for that new OPR map somehow. I don't think that's even on the horizon. All this other stuff is like economics. I'm going to skip through that and I'm going to go back down to some other things that they added in later. There are some patterns that they updated in here. So there's patterns from the last year event. Those will have elemental aversion and refreshing on the roll for the gold ones, and then you'll have a 25% chance of hitting Resil, so that's like basically best in slot. The most recent year is going to be physical aversion, so it's not nearly as good, but it's still not bad, I guess. So that's kind of noteworthy. And then they did some like other changes in here. So this is the voidblade thing. They fixed that, which is good. Uh, all these seem like they're pretty okay. Changes, but yeah, I think overall it's just Fire Sap is really good. Voidblade is interesting. Great Axe Warhammer is more of a util role rather than a DPS role, but still will do good damage because Shirking Forward is kind of gone. I don't think it will be a thing where you run like 15 or 16 of them. I think it will be a thing where you run like 8 to 10 of them, kind of that sort of situation. And then there's some other niche ramifications. I'm going to go into like certain specs that are kind of interesting. So there is a tier gap for the point builds. SNS is insane, Heavy Bruiser is insane, and Heavy Voidblade is just like insane off of this. The Heavy Bruiser is like the main idea is like, oh, you have this AoE weekend. I think Voidblade is generally better than that because you have AoE like 15% weekend if you go Voidblade Scream Oblivion, and then you get the Oblivion really fast, which will strip buffs, which doesn't really matter as much anymore. So you might actually get into a spot eventually where you start running Orb over there if you don't really care about stripping the buffs. Scream seems really good. Uh, but yeah, there are a lot of different benefits of that Voidblade. SNS though, you get the old fortified to your teammates, which makes it like basically just a tier above almost everything else on its own. Has AoE weaken with that shield rush, which is really good. You can absorb projectiles really effectively in a ranged incoming range meta, so I think that makes it really strong. You have higher passive fort inherently because of your shield itself can have a ward perk. Blocking the range meta again, very good. You have good single target CC and disruption with that class. A Heavy Bruiser, this is basically just AoE util, is why Heavy Bruiser seems kind of interesting. I think Medium Bruiser is not as good in that next patch. I think he will actually just get one shot by a Rain of Arrows pen shot, and I think bows are going to start running that combo again because their other stuff got nerfed, and I think Fire Staff will also be dumping a lot of damage on point, and I expect for people to get 3-2-1 and blown up on point even, which is different than before. Before, it was only healers that were getting 3-2-1. I think the point's now going to get 3-2-1. Heavy Void Blade, the main thing that's really cool about here is the refreshing move aspect of Void Gauntlet. So if I go to Skill Builder for New World Database, basically they nerfed refreshing move, so it only applies off of one person. Void Gauntlet has refreshing fertility, so this is 5% CDR. Really easy to get off in a war setting, especially if you're on point. And then also if you crit, then you get 5% extra CDR. So you tie both of those together with a void blade, and you're just gonna be critting a lot. You're gonna get a lot of CDR. Both of these can cleave with that. If you like want to get like have really insane solo carry potential, you go void blade, scream, and orb. If you want more util, then I think oblivion is a good way to have util. I don't know if the stripping will be as impactful as people think it will be, though. Like, it could easily see a spot where oblivion starts getting cut and people want to run orb because they're applying the actual old rend, which is really really effective, or a spot where people are cutting scream because this fortify isn't really worth anything, and you don't really need the disease to blow people up. Like, I think the void blade is the best, is either the best or second best thing with void gauntlet, and then it's orb, and then from there it's between oblivion and scream is your last perk, which is a lot different than what it used to be. In terms of like the lifesteal aspect of void blade, it's good. It's just like not something I don't think that matters a ton, because you're not going to be playing to try to be under 50% HP a ton, but because you have like a 16k health if you get to 300 con, then that's like, 8k health you have to play with where you have 50% or 30% lifesteal, which is pretty nuts. So void blade overall seems pretty strong there. Uh, so that's like kind of the on point of what I think will actually be run. Heavy BB, which was noteworthy before, even on live, heavy BB has completely fallen off, and I don't think is like run a ton anymore. It just doesn't provide enough util, and then it's going to heavily nerf with the Fortify changes. I think it's basically going to be a dead spec. You're not going to really see it. A heavy spear seems solid. The main thing with it is I think it's outclassed by Void Blade, which was kind of filling that niche spot. It's a lot of single target stuff. Has a decent amount of CC, but again, I think Void Blade just does it a little bit better than Spear does on point. So I don't think Spear actually fits in that spot anymore. Tank Greatsword is just outclassed by SNS. So basically, all of these are kind of a little bit worse than these other point builds, and I think these will be the primary ones that you see on point. In terms of ball groups, Greatsword or Great Axe. This shouldn't be Greatsword. Great Axe Warhammer seems like it will still be good. I don't think it will be like everywhere, but I think it will still be good. It will still probably be seen in the majority of groups, but I don't think it will be seen as a 2 of as a default everywhere anymore. It's going to be good at clumping people, but I don't think it's necessarily going to have the finishing potential it did before, and you're going to want to slot other builds and use that as sort of an initiator role, which is a bit different than what it was before. Spear, the reason why this is really interesting is basically because you can get the grit, and you can get to 150 dex, and you have access to a lot of weakens and very low cooldowns. So you're just going to be able to do a lot in a range meta. In a melee meta, I don't think Spear works as well. In a range meta, I think Spear works really, really well, and I think it's going to be a ranged meta. You also have really good disruption on healers. Like, you get one of these guys on a healer, and it's lights out. Like, the healer will either live and not be able to play the game ever, or will die. So, and there's not much of a between there. But either way, the Spear is doing a lot, and I think it's easily possible to see this be slotted as a one of in every group. I think it's also possible that people don't actually find a way to get a ton of value with it because they're playing it too clump heavy and they're not like kind of aiming for the people that are around the point as much, and they're using their abilities off cooldown, and there's like really long ability animations when you really should be playing for like the autos and kind of timing things a little bit better, like how you would play for a BB, I think. Like, you have the ability to spam abilities, but doesn't mean that you should use them off cooldown all the time. But Spear seems like it will be a pretty solid build overall. Medium Void Blade, I think this is interesting because of the cleave. I think it can replace Grid X Warhammer in a sense. I think you'll still die about as fast as a Grid X Warhammer would. You'll have worse damage, but you have better util. It's interesting. I don't think it's this thing that will get run in the support slot as much. I still think you want that old kind a little bit, because you want people that are being able to be more reactive, and the Void Blade is like a very much so like I'm gonna get in there if I have 300 con. So I think it fits more of it as a ball roll, and I think it will be run a little bit and experimented with, but I don't see it like overtaking Spear or Great Axe Warhammer right off the bat. But I think Spear, Void Blade, and Great Axe Warhammer are the three main specs that, as a melee, from a melee perspective, they're going to be the best. Great Sword Hatchet's also noteworthy because you don't have to get that 300 con, so you're going to be able to do more damage. And you'll have access to the dodges, so I could see this being run in light, I could see this being run in medium. For this build in particular, for the medium, I think the hatchet change is a buff. For the For the other variant, where you're in light, I think it's a nerf. But I could be wrong about that. It seems like pretty solid either way. Support builds, Void Gauntlet, nothing really comes close to this. I still think you need a one of a Void Gauntlet without the Void Blade in every group, because if you run the Void Blade, it's really easy to tunnel on things. You can run it as like a solo thing. I think someone will figure out a way to make that work. I don't think it will work right away, and it will take time for that to actually be used effectively. Assassin builds, I'm breaking this up from nuker because I think nuker ones are more specific. This is like more light melee, I guess would be an assassin build. The reason why it will do a lot of damage next patch is because people won't be able to ward to those melee specs at all except for their gems. Because they'll have the slot elemental version restricting for it because the Fortify is just so bad and that you won't be able to actually ward to these, so it makes them kind of interesting. I don't think voidblade does significant enough damage to be considered in this, which is also noteworthy. Because I know some people are trying to build voidblade for the damage, but voidblade isn't good for the damage. Voidblade is good for the CDR and the util that Void Gauntlet that can provide. It does good damage over time, but you don't build voidblade to do damage. You build voidblade to have good util, and then you get good damage because you have good util. Like you apply 15% rend and weaken, and you just start winning the fight, right? Like that's all you need. Like you don't need to go, hey, I'm gonna go attunement enchanted and drop my scream and drop my keen and do all these other things. Like no, get the refreshing move in my opinion, and just like, or get the keen so that you crit so that you get a better refreshing move, and you just do things with that. I don't think it has to be much more complicated. I could see people like trying to do like a hybrid thing. It was like, hey, I have scream in my armor, have enough keen already, like maybe I'll try to go in more into damage, but I don't think it's going to be as good as the other spec, and it's kind of ambitious overall. The only spot where I think that is kind of interesting is from a lifesteal perspective, or maybe you do enough damage to get enough lifesteal for it to work, but that would require a lot of testing, and sounds like something I could easily fall flat on its face because you don't have access to super good fortify on next patch. So Greatsword SNS I think is interesting because it's like kind of a single target thing where you can kind of block some range attacks to a degree, and you can still go in with that with the Great Axe. Uh, this should be great, great sword. This should be great axe. It seems weaker than it used to be, but I still think it's going to be used to disrupt people that are lighter. You could also try like this with hatchet, like greatsword hatchet, great axe hatchet. I think also will be good. All three of those seem like they'll get punished more easily, but they seem viable enough. I think you'll be able to just like if you're say you're gonna try to counter fire staffs and you slot against fire, you try to then you maybe have like a thrust amulet or something like that. Like I think people would start doing that kind of setup and just not word versus melee and have this be like an anti-range spec if that makes sense. And that's where I think these assassin builds fit in. Nuker builds are meant to like kind of counter the ball, counter the point to a degree. I think Great Axe BB is the only one that kind of is a hybrid build on that list where you can kind of group people and you can clump and nuke them all in one build, which is the AIO, but that's what that means. So it's like kind of interesting. Firestaff BB, it just has really, really good damage. Seems like a meta spec. Bow Rapier, they are reverting Rapier, so it will probably be the best weapon for Bow to go with. I think Spear is also interesting to a degree, but is harder to make work. It seems like both of that and Firestaff will be really, really good. Fire Stuff IG is also really good. The actual spike itself, I didn't realize this the other day when I said it, but it does count as a melee thing, so it's not affected by elemental aversion, so it actually does good damage. It also interrupts healers out of their heal animations, which is really noteworthy. So you can kind of use that to go on a healer with your fire staff, spike them, and then finish them, kind of thing is the idea. And you can prevent them from healing themselves if you're mechanically good enough at it with it. So that's like the big takeaways. Like I'll put them together a more formal thing, but basically Voidblade getting the grit instantly makes it so it's like considered for almost every position because it's a build that does decent damage, provides really really good util, especially because Voidblade stuff functions as the old uh passives, which was the only weapon that functions that way in the game. Has access to weaken, which is really good. It just kind of does it all. Has a lot of things that probably need to get looked at. Like compared to the other perks, this refreshing fertility probably needs to get looked at. This refreshing of precision probably needs to get looked at. But I think they're worried about nerfing it too much for some reason. Voidblade has been meta ever since it's come out, and it will be meta until it gets like basically nerfed into the ground. So that's really interesting. Great X Warhammer seems a lot worse. Spear's kind of interesting because it could soft counter range. I don't know if it's necessarily needed or not, but I think it's a really good way to deal with a heavy range meta, which it looks like we might be in, but with Voidblade kind of coming around, there might be enough viable melee-ish specs to where it's not just going to be fully dominated by range, and you can kind of do a bit of both. I think Spear works well in single target. I'm not sure if Spear works well in like more group situations. Like a void gauntlet, you're not gonna really have a window to hit the sweep on them, to be honest. So it's kind of interesting. Either way, it's gonna be really exciting. Gonna be really fluid, at least at the beginning, until someone finds something that will shot people. But hopefully they'll be a little bit quicker and try to do the nerfs to things that come out. It seems like there will be builds that one shot people, but the preemptive things to change crit damage might be good enough to prevent people from getting utterly destroyed by some specific combo. Like I know on live, like a funny combo that some people are doing that will still be viable next patches. So just go for a spear, like a javelin, and then it'll go into a bow heavy shot in the pen, and that just one shots people. And you can't really do anything about that. And that's going to be there on the PTR. Like there will always be something quirky that someone will find out will one shot people in New World. It's just like the nature of the game. So we'll see how these changes pan out, but let me know what you guys have in terms of thoughts. I know it's not like a tier list thing, but I just wanted to go over uh, everything as a whole in terms and give like a whole big picture of like the changes rather than just kind of doing a super guided like, hey, this is my cookie cutter, this is best, and here's why kind of thing. But basically, the changes to Fortify make change this whole meta perspective a lot, and then stuff that aligns. If in my Discord, I have this chart and announcements, but basically stuff that's in this ABS column is really good. Stuff in the base damage column is pretty good, and this other stuff in the middle is not nearly as good anymore. Um, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.